Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving into a piece of literature that is quite literally as heavy and unyielding as its title. We're looking at Wilfrid Gibson's century-old narrative poem, The Stone. Written back in the early 20th century, a time of intense industrial labor and, unfortunately, everyday tragedies, this poem viscerally captures the petrifying weight of human grief. And what's really wild about it is how it uses this very simple, everyday conversational tone to slowly reveal an absolutely devastating emotional breakdown. It's an incredible piece of storytelling told entirely from the perspective of a simple stonemason, exploring exactly what happens to the human heart when it is just shattered beyond repair.
So what happens when grief turns a person into stone? It's a heavy question, right? We usually think of grief as something loud, weeping, wailing, a huge vocal outpouring of sorrow. But Gibson's poem forces us to look at a totally different manifestation of trauma. We're going to see how true, bottomless loss can trigger an extreme emotional breakdown, completely petrifying a person and turning them into a living monument of their own tragedy.
Gibson actually drops us right into the middle of the action, what we call in media res in literature. Just listen to this opening plea. And will you cut a stone for him to set above his head? And will you cut a stone for him? A stone for him, she said. A young woman visits a stonemason, and she just repeats this desperate question over and over. This immediate repetition instantly establishes a mood of unyielding fixation. Like we don't even know what happened yet, but we can instantly feel her singular, consuming obsession with memorializing the person she lost. Section 1, The Fatal Quarry Accident, covering stanza 2. Let's get into the backstory to actually understand that desperate plea. Just 3 days prior, the woman's lover, described as a lively stripling, brave and tall, was killed in a stone quarry. Tragically, he loitered after a warning call for an explosive shot was given. With a sudden flash and a rumbling fall, a vibrant young life is completely extinguished by a splintered rock. And Gibson masterfully uses language to hammer home this tragedy. He writes, "A lifeless heap with face of clay, and still as any stone he lay." Look at that brilliant use of a simile there, equating the young man's lifeless body with the very object that killed him, the stone. Plus, in poetry, we call still as any stone a transferred epithet. The stillness of death is transferred onto the object of the stone itself. The irony is just gut-wrenching. The rock that crushed him has literally become his likeness. Section 2, A Woman Turned to Stone, covering stanzas 3 through 5. This brings us to the traumatic revelation. The stonemason, our narrator here, actually wanted to go to the young woman and break this horrific news to her gently, but, as he points out, some poor fool beat him to it. A careless messenger just flung wide her door and blurted out the news, totally stripping the mason of his chance to soften the blow. And the emotional impact of that sudden, blunt delivery, it is utterly devastating. Gibson conveys this devastation through what we can call the anaphora of trauma. Anaphora is just the repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning of successive clauses. Had struck her lover dead for her, had struck the girl's heart dead in her, had struck life lifeless at a word. Do you see how that repetition rhythmically mimics the physical hammer-like blows of the falling rock? The careless words of the messenger strike the young woman's soul with the exact same violent, crushing force that the actual stone used to strike her lover. This builds into an incredible contrast between two very different types of grieving. On one side, we see the deceased man's mother. She wept. That's your typical, expected, vocal mourning. But on the other side, the young woman, she could not weep. Her lover slept in death, but she could not sleep in life. The crucial takeaway here is that her grief is so deep, so bottomless, that it bypasses tears altogether. It plunges her into a terrifying, tearless paralysis. The silence here is deafening. And that brings us to the absolute anchor motif of the poem, a woman turned to stone. This metaphor signifies a state of total emotional petrification and numbness. I mean, for 3 days and 3 nights, she doesn't move. She doesn't sleep. It's a complete suspension of time, where sunrise and sunset just become one to her. She just sits there with wide, tearless eyes that the narrator says saw not, yet suggests a hyper-aware internal processing of her pain. Her capacity to engage with the living world has completely shut down. Section 3, The Haunting Nightly Vigil, from stanzas 6 through 8. The narrative progresses to the 4th night following the tragedy. The woman's passive shock suddenly transforms into an active, incredibly eerie vigil. She finally leaves her home, showing up at the stonemason's door like a ghost, with wide gray eyes, just to repeat her single demand. "And will you cut a stone for him?" She then follows him inside and begins a silent, relentless watch.
Tracing her tragic descent on a timeline really lets us appreciate her complete emotional shutdown. 3 days before, we have the fatal accident. Then we endure 3 full days and nights of complete emotional stasis and numbness. On the 4th night, the silent vigil begins at the Mason's workshop. And this steadily builds the tension toward the next night, which holds the poem's final twist. This timeline perfectly maps exactly how the heavy, agonizing silence of her nightly watch unfolds.
And let me tell you, that silent watch is pure agony for the stonemason. He says, "Those eyes that cut me to the bone and cut my marrow like cold steel." Her silent, unseeing stare has this intense, almost violent physical effect on him, as if she literally plucked the heart right out of his chest. It's not just that she's sad. Her grief is so concentrated, so powerfully unexpressed, that it invades and unsettles him as he finally starts cutting the stones smooth and square.
Section 4. Chiseling Together with Death in stanza 9. I want to slow down the pacing right here because we have officially reached the psychological and emotional climax of the poem. The stonemason is working night after night by candlelight to carve the lover's name, and the woman sits beside him like a ghost, watching the work with eyes of flame, eyeing every single stroke of his overwearied, wincing grip.
This intense pressure leads the mason to a horrific realization. The two of us were chiseling, together, I and death. We really need to linger on this terrifying personification. Death isn't just an event that happened 3 days ago. Death is an active partner in the room with them. The mason realizes that for every single stroke his mallet makes on the stone, Death is making a matching cut deeper into the young woman's soul. While he shapes a monument of memory, Death is actively consuming her. Section 5. The devastating final twist, spanning stanzas 10 and 11. Eventually, the brutal task is finished. The mason lays down his mallet, and the ritual of memorialization is complete. And for the very first time, the woman breaks her silence. She breathes her lover's name with a soft sigh, her first expression of emotion, and then she passes slowly through the open door and never returns, which culminates in a devastatingly simple final couplet. "Next night I labored late alone to cut her name upon the stone." Gibson uses profound understatement here. He doesn't explicitly come out and say the woman died of a broken heart, but the implication is absolutely deafening. Once her task of memorialization was complete, her tether to the living world just snapped. Her grief hollowed her out completely, and so the mason must add her name to the very same stone. Section 6. Crafting the perfect tragedy and its structural choices. So how did Gibson make this narrative so impactful? Let's step back from the story itself for a second to analyze the structural choices and poetic devices that elevate this tale of absolute loss into a true masterpiece of early 20th century literature. Notice how the actual mechanics of the poem reinforce its emotional weight. The meter is iambic tetrameter, and "will you cut a stone?" It provides this relentless, solemn rhythm that echoes a funeral chant. Then there's the symbolism. The stone constantly shifts its meaning throughout the explainer. It's the murder weapon in the quarry, it represents her emotional numbness, and ultimately it becomes the final memorial gravestone. And of course, the personification of death as an active, chiseling partner intensifies the sheer emotional trauma of the whole thing. So, what should you really take away from all this? Well, here are the core themes of The Stone. First, grief as a slow death. The woman dies emotionally long before she dies physically. Second, the unbearable weight of silence, proving that a lack of sound can honestly be more oppressive than a scream. Third, death as a persistent presence, haunting the living. And finally, art as mourning, how the mechanical, rhythmic act of chiseling art is intimately connected to the all-consuming physical ritual of grieving. I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. If art can immortalize our mourning, how does the weight of unexpressed grief shape the monuments we leave behind? Wilfrid Gibson's The Stone shows us that sometimes the absolute heaviest burdens we carry are the ones we cannot even speak of. It's a powerful look into the mechanics of human coping. I really hope this deep dive leaves you eager to explore more literature and the fascinating ways it reflects our deepest emotions. Thanks so much for learning with me today.